Thomas Aquinas did not believe pride was simply thinking too highly of yourself. He believed it was something far more dangerous, a corruption that blinds reason before it touches anything else. And that distinction changes how you understand nearly every mistake you have ever made. Consider the moments you defended a position you suspected was wrong, or refused advice you later wished you had taken. Aquinas would say that was not stubbornness. It was pride doing its quiet, invisible work. In this video we will examine why Aquinas placed pride at the root of every other sin, and how he believed it disables the very faculty meant to keep us honest. If you want to go deeper into these ideas, subscribe. This is the kind of content we build here, one idea at a time. Writing in the 13th century, in the Summa Theologica, Aquinas drew a line between confidence and pride that almost no one draws today, and that line begins with a single question: whether you are still willing to stand under the truth. Most sins announce themselves. Greed wants more, lust wants pleasure, anger wants to strike, each carries an obvious appetite that even the sinner can recognize. Pride is different, because it can disguise itself as virtue, which is precisely why Aquinas considered it the most treacherous of all the capital vices. The proud man often appears disciplined, accomplished, even admirable, and yet beneath that surface lies a quiet refusal to acknowledge anything above himself. In the Summa Theologica, Aquinas defines pride as the inordinate desire for one's own excellence, and the word inordinate is essential. He does not condemn the desire for excellence itself, because seeking what is good is natural and even commendable. What he condemns is the desire that has slipped its order, a desire that no longer measures itself against truth, but against the self alone. This is why pride is so difficult to detect from within. The greedy man can feel his greed, but the proud man feels only that he is right, that his judgment is sound, that others simply fail to see what he sees clearly. Therefore the very symptom of pride is the inability to perceive it, which makes it unlike any other failing of the soul. But this raises a harder question: if pride hides so well, why did Aquinas insist it comes first among all sins, before any of the more visible vices? Aquinas inherited a striking claim from Scripture and from Augustine before him, that pride is the beginning of all sin. He takes this not as poetry but as a precise structural statement about how the soul goes wrong. In the Summa Theologica he argues that pride is the first sin because it is a turning away from God and from truth toward the inflated self, and every other sin follows from that initial turning. Consider the logic carefully. Before a man steals, before he betrays, before he indulges, there is a prior movement in which he sets his own will above the order of reason and refuses to submit to what is higher than himself. This refusal is pride, and it is the gate through which the other vices enter, because once a person will no longer stand under truth, nothing remains to restrain his appetites. This is why Aquinas calls pride the root rather than merely one branch among many. The proud man has already disabled the part of himself that would have judged the lesser sins as wrong. Therefore the order is not accidental: pride corrupts the judge before it permits the crime. What Aquinas described next, however, contradicts the comfortable assumption that pride is only a problem for tyrants and the powerful. There is a temptation to imagine pride as a vice of conquerors and kings, the visible arrogance of those who command others. Aquinas dismantles this comfortable distance, because for him pride is not primarily about how you treat people. It is about a disorder in your relationship to reality, and that disorder can live just as easily in the humble-seeming clerk as in the emperor. The Latin word Aquinas uses, superbia, comes from the sense of rising above, of placing oneself higher than one's true measure. The proud person, in his analysis, claims an excellence he does not truly possess, or claims it as entirely his own when it was given, or desires it without ordering that desire to anything beyond himself. In each case the fault is not ambition but distortion, misalignment between what the self believes and what is actually true. This is what separates pride from healthy confidence. Confidence rests on an accurate estimate of one's powers and remains open to correction, whereas pride inflates the estimate and closes the door against any voice that would adjust it. Therefore the test of pride is not how much you value yourself, but whether you can still be told you are wrong. And yet, Aquinas argued that this disorder does something stranger and more damaging than mere inaccuracy. It begins to reach into the intellect itself. Here we reach the heart of Aquinas' claim and the reason this video bears the title it does. For Aquinas, the deepest damage pride inflicts is not moral but intellectual, because pride corrupts the faculty of reason that exists precisely to correct us. He builds this on Aristotle's account of the soul, in which the intellect is meant to apprehend truth and the will is meant to follow it. When a man becomes proud, he no longer submits his intellect to reality. Instead he bends reality to fit the image he holds of himself, and in doing so he quietly disables his capacity to perceive what is actually the case. Aquinas describes a chain of effects that follow from pride, and among them are presumption, obstinacy, and a discord with truth, each a way in which the mind loses contact with the real. This is why pride blinds. A liar still knows the truth he is hiding, but the proud man no longer knows it, because he has rearranged his own seeing. Therefore pride is more dangerous than ordinary deception, since it deceives the deceiver first and leaves him certain in his blindness. But if pride disables the very faculty that would diagnose it, this raises the most troubling question of all: how can a proud man ever come to know that he is proud? The genius and the terror of Aquinas' analysis is that pride seals itself shut. Because it operates by corrupting judgment, the proud man's judgment will always rule in his own favor, which means he cannot reason his way out of pride using the very reason that pride has compromised. He is, in a precise sense, imprisoned in his own certainty. Aquinas understood this as the reason pride is so resistant to ordinary remedies. You can argue a greedy man out of a particular greed by appealing to a greater good, but you cannot argue a proud man out of pride, because he will simply judge your argument from inside the distortion. His standard of truth has become himself, and so any correction is measured against the very thing that needs correcting. This is why Aquinas, drawing on the long Christian tradition, located the cure not in better arguments but in a different posture of the soul altogether. The proud man does not need to be persuaded that he is wrong about this or that. He needs to be returned to the condition in which he can be persuaded at all, the willingness to stand beneath a truth larger than himself. What Aquinas proposed as that cure runs directly against everything a culture of self-assertion teaches. There is a dimension of pride Aquinas emphasizes that modern readers often miss entirely: the refusal to receive. For Aquinas, much of what is excellent in us is given rather than achieved: our intelligence, our circumstances, the very capacity to reason. The proud man, however, claims these as wholly his own, and in doing so he severs himself from the truth of his own dependence. This is why Aquinas treats pride as a kind of ingratitude built into the structure of the self. The proud person cannot say thank you in any deep sense, because gratitude requires admitting that something good came from beyond him. Therefore pride isolates, not only socially but metaphysically, cutting a man off from the sources that actually sustain him. Consider how this plays out in ordinary life. The person who cannot accept help, who cannot acknowledge a debt, who must believe that every good thing he holds was earned entirely by his own hand, this person experiences pride not as triumph but as a quiet loneliness, because he has made himself the sole author of a story he did not write alone. Aquinas saw this isolation as one of pride's deepest punishments, and it points directly toward the strange shape of its only remedy. If pride is the inordinate desire for one's own excellence, then its remedy must be something that restores a true measure of the self, and Aquinas names that remedy humility. But here he is careful, because humility is among the most misunderstood of all the virtues. It is not the belief that you are worthless, nor the performance of self-deprecation, both of which are simply pride wearing a different mask. In the Summa Theologica, Aquinas defines humility as the virtue that restrains the immoderate desire for one's own excellence and keeps a man within the bounds of his true measure. Notice the word measure. Humility is not the absence of self-estimation but its correction, the willingness to see yourself exactly as you are, neither inflated nor crushed, which is far harder than either flattery or false modesty. This is why Aquinas paired humility with magnanimity, the virtue of reaching for great things. The two are not opposites but partners, because the humble man can pursue greatness without lying to himself about his powers, and the magnanimous man can attempt much precisely because he is not afraid of the truth about his limits. What humility actually restores, however, is something larger than character, and this is where the entire argument finds its practical point. The deepest claim in Aquinas' whole treatment is this: humility restores reason. If pride blinds the intellect by bending reality to fit the self, then humility clears the eye by returning the self to its proper place beneath the truth. The humble man can be taught, corrected, and changed, because he has not made his own judgment the final court of appeal. This reframes humility entirely. It is not a moral decoration or a social softness, but an intellectual condition, the precondition for seeing anything clearly at all. Aquinas understood that you cannot learn what you already believe you know, and you cannot be corrected if you cannot be told you are wrong. Therefore humility is not the enemy of intelligence but its foundation, the open posture without which the mind simply circles its own assumptions. Consider what this means in practice. Every genuine act of learning requires a small death of pride, the admission that you did not already understand. The scholar who revises his thesis, the craftsman who accepts the better method, the person who hears hard truth and does not flinch from it, each is performing the humility Aquinas described, and each is, in that moment, more free. And this freedom is the final and most practical implication of everything we have traced. We arrive at the most useful conclusion of Aquinas' analysis, and it is one that overturns the modern assumption that pride empowers and humility weakens. In Aquinas' account the reverse is true: pride imprisons because it locks a man inside his own distorted certainty, while humility liberates because it returns him to contact with reality, where alone real growth is possible. This is the practical heart of the matter. The most blinded person is not the one full of doubt but the one full of unexamined confidence, because doubt can still be answered while pride cannot even ask the question. Therefore the single most valuable habit you can cultivate, in Aquinas' terms, is the willingness to hold your own judgments accountable to something beyond them, to remain, in his phrase, within your true measure. This costs almost nothing and requires no special circumstance. It asks only that when you suspect you might be wrong, you stay with that suspicion rather than fleeing it, and that when correction comes, you receive it as a gift rather than an attack. In that small repeated act, the faculty pride had blinded begins to see again. Aquinas spent his life arguing that truth is not a threat to the self but its salvation, and pride is simply the refusal to believe that. To set pride down, then, is not to become smaller. It is to be able, at last, to see. Aquinas' claim, traced from beginning to end, is that pride is the first sin not because it is the cruelest but because it is the blindest, a disorder that corrupts reason itself and seals the proud man inside a certainty he can no longer question. Its cure is not self-loathing but humility, the accurate measure of the self that restores the very capacity to see and to be corrected. The practical lesson is simple and demanding: the moment you suspect you may be wrong, stay with that suspicion rather than defending yourself, because that small willingness is where blinded reason begins to recover its sight. Aquinas asked the hardest questions a human being can ask. We can still learn from how he answered them. Subscribe to continue. And if you want a practical starting point, the free Stoic Starter Kit in the description gives you everything you need to begin. All books referenced today are linked below.